Hello, everyone. Very good morning. Welcome to the PAM Masterclass series. My name is Praveen. I head the support team for PAM suite of products. I will be the host and presenter for today's session. Today's topic is going to be on privilege elevation and delegation management. Before we begin, few housekeeping announcement. All attendees will be muted throughout the session. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of this. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise them in the Q&A panel on the left side of your screen. We want this session to be interactive, so please feel free to raise as many questions as you have. Also, the recording of this webinar will be sent to all the attendees in a couple of days. As well as you can find the recorded version in the website where you registered for this masterclass. The topics handled today will be common for both PAM 360 and Access Manager Plus. For the demonstration purpose, we will be using PAM 360 interface. This masterclass series will be conducted every second Thursday of the month. The previous session was on privilege account governance, where you would have learned on how to onboard users, resources which you would like to manage using this application, and then role-based access. If you have missed it, you can find the recording in the registration page. Please go through it. So, without any further delay, let's get into today's session. Before I would like to show you some stats from the website. Information is beautiful, which contains all the data about the biggest breaches and acts in which has happened in the recent times. And when we filter the method used for breaches, we see major breaches are due to hacking, which is mainly because of the privileged account getting compromised. And the second highest method is because of the poor security, since organization does not have a proper security solution in place. And then the privilege abuse, or basically a starting point for any type of cyber attack, which is led by unmanaged standing privileges. By unmanaged standing privileges, what we refer to is, let's say somebody need access to servers in order to perform some administrative operation for their day-to-day job by giving local admin or domain admin rights. So that by itself is an unmanaged standing privilege, because without quantifying what kind of operation they are trying to do, you're providing them with ultimate privileges without any form of mechanism to fall back or demote that particular user from having the extended privilege. Excess privilege always brings in a lot of risk. The risk being access granted or not being monitored or reviewed periodically. Also, some of these access provided stay permanent. If you make somebody a local admin or a domain admin, unless you remember to go back and remove them from their respective groups, they are going to have full on domain admin or local admin rights. An undetectable lateral movement also happens. For example, somebody needs to fix a software problem on a server. You decided to give them domain admin rights, so they are able to do whatever they want to fix the software problem. Maybe they need to install some other tools, or they might have to uninstall some of the components to fix the issue. Regardless, giving them domain admin rights means they could do the job of troubleshooting the software, but they can also get lateral movement. They could go to some other machine, or they could connect to the Active Directory or the DNS. So this type of lateral movement is going to cause a problem. You give them access with a particular perspective for a particular business case, but they are able to leverage that access to gain the lateral movement into the entire network. It's quite common for employees and personnels to leave the organization at some point of time or move from one team to another. The challenge here is, while they are working for your particular team or organization, they might create accounts for their usage. So, if you take a database administrator, it's quite common for them to create a local database account. If you take a network engineer, it's quite common for them to create local accounts on the switches, routers, or firewalls. So they get easy access for their job. They are able to have a local account that using which they are able to use and when it's needed. But the problem is, when they quit the organization, how would you know how many such accounts are sitting in your infrastructure? Is there a way to know? For example, somebody named Chris is working in your organization couple of years back, and while working he has created a lot of local accounts in the name of Chris and left your organization. So from your typical log management or sim solution or even your monitoring solution, you will not be able to identify it because these accounts were created many years ago. So this again is going to be excess privileges and having to face the consequences of the excess privilege. So, to achieve the least privilege access, you should be able to conduct a periodic audit to identify how many privileged accounts are there in first place. Every box, every device that you have will definitely have a privileged account. You cannot have a device without having a privileged account. So let's take a Windows box that has a local admin account. With the network devices, it's going to be an admin account again. Um, so you should be able to audit those accounts periodically. You have to be able to assign the right set of privileges just to the right set of people, which is bare minimum, just enough for them to be able to do oh, their day-to-day operations. Then you implement a control process where they have a way to request you for the elevated privileges as and when it's required. So in a week's time, they would probably need a domain admin access just a couple of times. So on a normal day, my account is not a full blown domain admin or a local admin. I don't have access to any other shared accounts, but as and when it's required, when I want to connect to the domain controller or connect to the DNS, I should have a way to put a request, get an approval, then have myself provided with a elevated privileges. Then remove any unwanted privilege or accounts. Like I said, ex-employee or people moving from one team to another, they all have a lot of accounts. Those accounts should be eliminated and remove any credentials that are hard coded in places. So it's quite common for IT administrators and other staff to hard code credentials and replace it with a better mechanism. So these scripts, config files, connectors, all for all of them to do their job, like connecting to applications or helping applications in performing operations. So they have to have the passwords hard coded in config files and script files, right? So because when these credentials are hard coded in config files, it can be easily get out of control. Also, if it is a challenge, if you change these credentials, there is just no way you can go to all the places and all those conflict files and make the password changes, right? And then finally, you should enforce application and command control, meaning if somebody asks for access, it is quite common for us to give the access. So, what is giving an access? If we bring it down to a simple yes or no question, if I need access, I get it, and now I'm able to log in. But how much privilege have I got? Can I uninstall something? Can I delete something? Can I remove a drive from this box? So, application and command control, that's the area where when you give access to somebody, they are able to remote into a box, maybe open an SSH session into a firewall. You should be able to control what they can or cannot do during that session. That's the part of application and the command control process. We will see how ManageEngine, PAM 360, and Access Manager Plus can help you in all the problems which we saw so far. The solution is going to be available in PAM 360 and Access Manager Plus of ManageEngine. But as I mentioned earlier, in this session, we will show the interface of PAM 360 for you to understand. Now, PAM 360 is a unified PAM solution. It has just-in-time privilege elevation capabilities where we can automatically elevate a local user into a local admin group or a domain user to Active Directory security groups, thereby giving them special privileges on temporary basis. The user gets elevated into the group and then demote automatically after some time or after an hour based on the approval the administrator provides to them. Then PAM 360 allows administrators to configure self-service privilege elevation to the target machine. Here, unlike just-in-time elevation, you can specify certain type of files or applications to get elevated privileges. For example, you want a new application to be installed on the server. Instead of giving full admin rights on the box, you can just give elevated privileges only for a exe or a msi file. So the person will launch a connection from PAM and then run the specific application file with elevated privileges to install the application. The same way, you can also give permission for command prompt, batch file, scripts file, etc. So only the specific file or application will be elevated. And then we have smart access workflows where you should be able to hook your solution with your incident management or ticketing management solution. Where somebody needs, they raise a ticket and their boss approves it, and the user comes to manage engine PAM, then try to gain elevated privileges, and they are asked for the incident number. They supply the incident number. PAM makes sure to validate those incident number against your ITSM solution and lets the user gain privileged access without any approval from with the approval from their boss. So that type of workflow is required, and ManageEngine PAM 360 integrates with all the leading ITSM solution in the market. Let's see a couple of real-time use cases before getting into the functionality. Let's say there is a network engineer, is on vacation, and the team is working on an incident that requests them to connect to a firewall and allow a particular IP address. Somebody has raised the request and it has been raised as a ticket, and the ticket has been assigned to the network engineer. But the engineer who tries to allow the IP address is on the vacation, right? The engineer is using the hotel Wi-Fi, and his personal device to connect to the corporate firewall. Now, allowing them with the direct access is the biggest mistake, obviously. So, how do you approach this problem? Let's say you have managed engine PAM 360. First, they would authenticate into the PAM solution um, uh, using Active Directory, LDAP, SAML, or any federated credentials. Then they would be challenged to provide an MFA, the second factor of authentication. Once they are inside the PAM, they will be able to supply the ticket number. The ticket number is going to be validated with your own ticketing system. Maybe it can be Manage Engine Service Desk Plus or Service Desk Plus on cloud. It can be ServiceNow, Jira, or any other ticketing system in the market. Regardless, PAM can validate against those ticketing system, identify from what time to what time the access should be given. Maybe network engineer needs access only for 15 minutes, just to add that one line in the firewall or just to add the IP address, right? And finally, even though the engineer is connecting from their own personal device to the firewall, the device does not require any direct connectivity. So the user only has the connectivity to PAM, and PAM only has the connectivity to the firewall. So basically, PAM connects to the firewall and tunnels the connection to the network engineer sitting at the hotel, right? So without compromising corporate security, you are able to give them access and give them access on a controlled time frame, and that is the first scenario. The next one is, let's say you have a DBA. The DBA is working remotely and they need access to the SQL database. Maybe they want to do some maintenance work, they want to run some queries. The problem is they are working in a coffee shop, right? And they often change devices. It is not like you can register the IP address of the device and give access only to that device because it keeps changing. So, in this scenario, PAM 360 would allow you to give them context aware access. So what that means is they need to get to the database, which is running on a Windows box. Obviously, they do need admin rights on that particular box. They should not get admin rights to the box because the box itself does not belong to the database team. Probably it belongs to the IT security team. So essentially, the user will be able to log into the Windows box as a regular user or a guest user, but then they should have the ability to run the Microsoft SQL Studio with elevated privileges because that is their job, right? So that is the scope. They should be able to run the Microsoft SQL Studio as a full-on admin because they need access to drop some database tables or create some new tables. So the point is, based on the scenario, based on the user, PAM 360 will allow them to have enough permissions on the database via the remote access, right? So this is another scenario. Now, the first solution to fix this scenario is going to be the advanced workflows using which you can verify the authenticity of the user and ensure that they have suitable privileges to perform a task or access data. To put it simple, access control is a way of selectively restricting access to sensitive data. An effective access control strategy compromises of two major components: authentication and authorization, right? So authentication, so using authentication, one can verify if a person is whom they claim to be, and then authorization alone is not sufficient to protect the data. An additional layer of authorization is also required, which determines whether the user is permitted to access the data or perform an action they are attempting to. Right. Let's see an example of advanced request release workflow process. And let's just say a user named Chris need access to a password that has been shared with them. The user makes you a request to access the password. The request is being sent to the designated administrator for approval. um, right? If the administrator does not approve the request within the stipulated time, the request becomes void. And let's say if the administrator approves the request, the user will be allowed to check out the password only for a stipulated time or the time set by given by the administrator, right? So in case more than one administrator has to approve the password request, the user will be allowed the user has to wait for both the administrators to approve the password. And once the password has been approved, the user will be able to check out the password and make use of it. Right. Now, I will get into the product and I will show how this access control workflow is going to work. Here I have logged in as an administrator. So this is one user. And I have another tab in which I have logged in as a normal user, right? Chris. So Chris has access to all these resources because it's been already shared by the administrator to Chris. And if you see right now, for this resource, PMP 2013, Chris can come retrieve the password copied to the clipboard. And the same way, we have something called PMP Win 10, right? Even for this, he can he can make use of the password or copy it to the clipboard and do whatever action he wants, right? Now, let's say these two servers are financial servers. I don't want Chris to just like that to make use of the password. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce access control workflow, and access control works on top of the sharing. So for the first resource, what I'm doing is I'm clicking on configure access control, and I'm selecting an authorized administrator here. I have two administrators to approve it, right? And even if I have a group which contains administrators, I can just select the complete group to authorize it. For now, I'm just taking two accounts. And then from this workflow, if you want to exclude few users or a group of users, you can very well do it. So only for these users, the workflow will not be in place. For all the other users, it will be enforced. And in this tab, we have a lot of options. First, when a user requests for the password, right? If the password request is not being processed by the administrator, it will be automatically void after 2 hours. So 2 hours is the default setting. If required, you can change it to 3, 4, or 5 based on your needs. And then I can enforce whether either one administrator should approve it or more than one administrator should approve it. Okay. And whenever a user is retrieving the password, if required, I can enforce a reason for the password retrieval. And whenever a password request is being made, right, a reminder will be sent to all the administrators to process the request, and it can be sent either 10 minutes or 15 minutes based on your needs. And let's say a user, Chris, is installing some software. That's the reason he has requested. He is patching that finance service, right? So let and the request is being approved for 30 minutes time duration. Unfortunately, Chris is not able to finish his patchwork within 30 minutes. Then administrators can provide him a grace time. So this grace time can be either 10 or 15 minutes or even another 30 minutes, but administrator can decide it and he can provide the grace time over here. And let's say a user has checked out a password, and the password is going to be uh, automatically checked in after 5 years of approval. So I will show you what's the checkout and check-in process, but there is an option for it to do. The PAM tool will automatically check in. Okay, so that is one operation. And this is the place where you're going to select how long the actual request is going to be available, whether 30 minutes or 60 minutes. And post that, if you want, after the workflow process is completed, if you want the passwords to be reset, you can very well do that by enabling this checkbox. So let me activate this functionality. Earlier, for this 2013 machine, right, when the user wants to make use of the password, he was able to do it directly, and he was able to copy the password. But now you will see a request button. So I'm clicking on request, I'm typing in my comments, right? I'm going to request it now, but let's say the schedule patch activity is going to happen at a later time. Then I can also select the later time here. For now, I'm just selecting it as now, and I'm clicking on send. It will say waiting for approval. Now, the authorized administrators, in this case, it's going to be Praveen and the admin account, right? They both will get a real time email notification stating the user has requested access, and they can either approve the request from the PAM interface. They will be getting a notification here, so they can just come here, approve the request. And we also have Android and iOS app of the PAM, okay, available in the App Store and Play Store. So if you have the PAM app installed, you can very well approve the request from your mobile apps on the go, right? So I'm processing this request. I can either approve it or reject it. As an administrator, based on the request, I'm going to decide it. And when approving it, I can either approve it now or I can even approve it for a later time frame. So I'm just going to do it now. Click on approve. Now it says add to use, which means the request is being approved for the user, right? He can click on checkout. Once he clicks on checkout, the password is going to be available only for 30 minutes time duration. So after this 30 minutes time duration, the password will get automatically checked in. The user can now make use of the password. Once he's done with his work, this he can come manually check in the password, or after 30 minutes time duration, the password will get auto checked in. And if the password is being reset is being enabled, the password will be changed automatically for this user, right? So this is the first use case where the user has to request for the password and the admin has to approve it, right? And let's say there is another scenario. The same, let's take the same case where the finance server is going to be patched. However, the finance server is going to be patched by a third party contractor during a night shift, right? But the administrator who is supposed to approve the password works on a day shift. To handle this, the same access control workflow, we have something called as auto approval functionality. So all the settings will, you can select the authorized administrators, you can select how long the request can be available void, whether the password has to be reset after the process is completed. All the settings will be the same. The only difference is you will come to the auto approval functionality, and you can select from what time to what time the password should be available. So let's say I'm going to approve it every day, or let's say today is a Thursday, so I'm just approving it on Thursday from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning, right? And I'm adding this request. So obviously, this request will be available only from 8 to 10 in the morning. Okay, so I'm activating this functionality, and the user will be able to automatically check out the passwords, right? Anytime from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. You can just click on send, right? By typing in his comments. And once it's sent, after it will be automatically approved, right? Based on the workflow which is being configured here. So these are the two types of workflows we have for access control. One is request and get it approved mechanism. The other one is auto approval mechanism. Right. Great. Now let's get back to the presentation, and the next functionality is the just-in-time privilege elevation, right? This feature comes in handy in situations where a local account or a domain account may not have the access privileges to use certain application or services in the system. So, using just-in-time privilege elevation, administrators can provide timely and controlled access to accounts to operate applications or system for a specific period. This feature gives administrators the ability to control who can access what and for how long, thereby eliminating the need to provide unnecessary blanket access for all accounts. This is based on the principle of least privileged access, which is one of the core philosophies of the zero trust network. So here is a workflow explaining the just-in-time privilege elevation. We have a user with no standing privileges. He is just a local user or a normal domain user. Okay. With the access control workflow, the user is requesting for elevated privileges. This privilege can be either approved interactively, that is, manager approving the request and release mechanism, or you can make it automated using the auto approval functionality. Once the access is granted, the user gets elevated permission for certain amount of time. Here, the complete session is going to be audited and recorded. After the time period, the access gets removed automatically, and the user again stands with no standing privileges. So we have two types of privilege elevation. The first one is for domain accounts, which gets elevated to Active Directory security groups. And the second one is for local accounts, which gets added to the local groups on the box. For domain account elevation, we make use of ManageEngine AD Manager Plus, which is an Active Directory management and reporting solution that allows IT administrators and technicians to manage Active Directory objects and groups and generate reports, right? So we let's get into the product and let's see how this privilege elevation works. So as I mentioned, first we will see how the domain user gets elevated to the domain administrator security groups, to the Active Directory security groups. So this is my domain controller, and I have a user named Chris, right? So I'm first opening a connection to my um, Active Directory, and this is the user we are going to test now. If you take this user, uh, and if you see, currently he is a member of domain users and remote desktop, right? So he has access, he is a member of only these two security groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure access control for this particular user, right? Uh, all the settings is going to be the same. In addition, for the you will have something called as policy configuration. And when I click on select, it will automatically enumerate and show me all the security groups available in my Active Directory. I have selected the DNS admins. Okay, so the user gets added to the DNS admins as and when it's required. I have saved this group and I'm activating this access control workflow. Right now, when this user Chris logs in, by default, he will not be able to retrieve the password. He has to request for it. And again, I'm doing it, clicking on send. It is going to say waiting for approval. And as an authorized admin, I'm going to get a password request, right? For the first one, I'm just processing the request and I'm approving it. Once it's been approved, the user, as usual, comes, check out the password. Once he clicks on checkout, right, he should be able to make use of the password. He can just RDP to the server. But now, when I come to my Active Directory and let me refresh, and if I check the same user, Chris, and he's been automatically added to the DNS admin group. So DNS admin is a security group in Active Directory. Chris gets added to this group and you will be able to access it only for 30 minutes time duration. So this is how he gets elevated to the Active Directory group. Now let's say Chris is done with his job. He clicks on check-in, right? Which means the request is done. And obviously, what we expect is the access to be revoked automatically. So I'm just refreshing my Active Directory. I'm right clicking on this properties. I'm clicking on member of. So Chris is no more the part of DNS admins group, right? So this is how we will are able to elevate the users to Active Directory security groups. And as I mentioned, we make use of the ManageEngine AD Manager Plus for this integration to work. So when you click on Admin Integrations, you will see ManageEngine, right? You have to click on ManageEngine and you have to enable this AD Manager Plus integration, where we make use of the RESTful API in order for us to communicate with AD Manager and do this integration, right? So this is the first case where domain users getting elevated to the domain administrative group. The next case is going to be local users getting elevated to the local administrative groups, right? So for this, I'm going to be making use of this machine which says UZ replacement. So here, for this machine, I have shared an RDP user, but the access control workflow is not in place. So let me go ahead and enable the access control workflow. So I'm clicking on user replacement, account actions, configure access control. I've selected authorized administrator, all this is selected by default. And now I'm clicking on privileged elevation here. And when I click on select, it's going to show me all the local security groups available, right? Let me remove this backup operators and let me select network configuration operators as a group, save and activate, right? Now let me RDP to this machine. Okay. Now, if we see this RDP user is the account for which I'm going to enable the access control workflow. And in the member of is just a part of remote desktop users and normal users, right? So the access control workflow is being enabled. I'm going to request for the access again. Type in my commands, send it. It's going to say waiting for approval. And again, when I come as an administrator, I can see a password request pending, and I'm going to process it, approve it. Now, when I log in back as a normal user, the request should be approved and I have to check out the password. Once I click on checkout, what I expect is this user should be added to this group, right? So let's refresh and see whether the user has been added. Yeah, so he's been added to the network configuration operators group, which is a local group in this machine. Again, when I click on checkout, check-in, right, the user should access should be automatically revoked and his role should be demoted. So when I click on properties, yes, he is no more access of the network operators group. So this is local account privilege elevation. This does not require any integration. This will work out of the box, right? So I hope the just-in-time privilege elevation is clear for you guys. The next one we are going to look at is self-service privilege elevation. So PAM 360 enables administrator to configure self-service privilege elevation on the target endpoints using an agent-based approach. So with access control enabled for accounts and resources, where self-service privilege elevation agents are configured, self-service privilege elevation takes precedence over the password access control. This means user can log into the target resources and run specified type of applications, for example, command prompt, EXEs, MSEs, and batch files. So as a PAM 360 privileged account with elevated privileges without requiring privileged account credentials, right? So self-service privilege elevation enables users to perform special administrative actions on applications by auto-approving the request and elevating their privileges temporarily to carry out their intended task. So once the requested activity is completed, the application privilege will be revoked and the credentials to the target box will be rotated automatically. Okay, so this is different from the just-in-time privilege elevation, as just-in-time includes time-based request release mechanism or elevate users into the respective security groups or local groups and demote them. So, a, a couple of examples pertaining to this feature are developers who need to install a particular application in the target machine but don't have sufficient privileges to do so. These developers can leverage self service privilege elevation to execute the installer file using a privileged account in the endpoint. Next use case is going to be DBAs who wish to perform database administrator operations job using the SQL Management Studio, but do not have full-on admin rights to the endpoint in which SQL instance is running, can leverage the self-service privilege elevation to run the SQL Management Studio, and they get elevated privilege, right? Again, let's see in the product how this functionality is going to work. So as I mentioned, for the self-service privilege elevation, you have to go for the agent-based approach, where you will be able to download the C# agent, and all our agent works based on agent key, and this agent key you can allow it for the certain amount of time, right? So you can just select this key and allow it, and yeah, so once the agents are being deployed in the target machine, automatically that particular machine will be added as a resource with the description added by agent. And then once it's been added, you have to click on resource actions configure self-service privilege elevation, and you can start selecting the account type for which it has to be elevated. So let's say I have a normal account. The account name is RDP user, which does not have local administrative privileges. But when I run this application command prompt, I have to have this administrative privileges on that box. Okay, so I'm just selecting this local account, I'm updating. Now let me get back to the normal user, and he has access to this account, RDP user account. So I'm launching a Windows remote desktop to this box, right? Once the Windows remote desktop is done, when I normally double click and the command prompt, and if I see here, I've logged in as a normal RDP user, right? But what I want is I need an elevated privilege for this command prompt so I can do my administrative job. So what I have to do is right click on this, and we will see an option which says run as PAM 360 privileged account. So once I click on run as PAM 360 privileged account, I will be prompted for a reason. I have to type in the reason and click on elevate. Now I have the command prompt open as administrator. I can verify the same by typing in the command uhamai, and you can see I have the local administrative rights for the command prompt. I've logged in as a normal user called RDP user. However, I have this privilege. By right clicking on it, I will see run as PAM 360 privileged administrator account. So I can run that, and I will be able to do my administrative job. So a command prompt is just an example which I have taken. You will be able to elevate any kind of application. For example, you can do exe files, MSI files, batch files, scripts files, PowerShells, all those stuff. So anything you want, you will be able to provide with the elevated privileges, and the user will be able to do their job on that particular application alone with the elevated rights, right? So yeah, let's come back. So that's about the self-service privilege elevation. Now let's see the best practice for privilege elevation. We have to first identify and eliminate all the standing privileges. You also have to review those privileges on regular basis, maybe once in every quarter or 6 months. You should be able to do that, not manually, obviously, because it's going to be time consuming. You will need a PAM solution or any PAM solution that can help you, but the objective is to be able to review the privileged access. In fact, for audits, the auditor asks you to provide the evidence of this review. So you need to be able to do that. Then you should be able to rotate your passwords, keys, certificates, because those are your keys to the kingdom. You have to make sure they are changed periodically, and if even after a privileged access has been given, you can enforce role-based access control for each user based on the team they belong to, based on their designation, and then they gain access to certain devices. That would be an enforcement of role-based access control and time-based release. If they need access by 11 a.m., then there is no need for access by 3 p.m., right? So once they are done with their job, the access should be automatically revoked, and you should be able to record and audit for every single event that happens via the privileged access. Anything that happens through the privileged access, meaning an admin or a root or an enable account access, is considered as a privileged operation that needs to be fully recorded and audited. Enforcing multi-factor authentication everywhere it is possible is another best practice. You should enforce MFA And then after logging into the application, if the access our data just to consume it, it is fine. But if they try to download the data for their day-to-day operation, then MFA should be enforced again for such sensitive operation. You have a chain and you know the line, you make sure MFA is enforced in every line of the chain, right? So that brings a quick recap. We have seen what is a privileged account and access, and we have seen what are the consequences of the privileged access, and how the smart request release workflow can help you in achieving the time-based access control, right? And then we have seen about the just-in-time privilege elevation for both domain accounts as well as for local accounts. Then self-service privilege elevation for elevating a certain application for a certain amount of time, right? So that brings us to the end of the masterclass. Um, and we have seen right we have few useful documents which will help you to learn and configure the manage engine PAM solution. Also, if you have any question post the session, you can very well write to the email address specified in the screen, right? And the floor is now open for questions, so feel free to raise as many questions as you have, and I will be glad to answer them. So we have a question. What is the difference between running an application as an administrator and running it as a PAM 360 privileged account? Yeah, it's both the same. So let's say the main purpose of the PAM 360 privilege elevation is you log in as a normal user to that box. You don't have the administrative privilege, right? So when you right click and when you run the application as PAM 360 privileged admin account, it means that you have the local administrative access for that particular application alone. So instead of giving the entire box with the local administrative privilege, you are going to just give it for a specific application, right? Uh, so that's the first question. And any other questions? Uh, I'm just going to wait for a couple of minutes. And if you guys have any questions, just raise it in the question and answer session. All right. I believe there are no more questions. So, if in case you have any questions, feel free to raise it to hello-pan360 at manageengine.com, and we will answer to those questions. Thank you once again for patiently listening to the session. Hope it was useful and informative. And thanks everyone for joining this session, and you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.